From prevention to resilience, what a decade of cybersecurity has taught us. Jim.
Yeah. Thanks, sir. Standing room only. All right, cool. So all you in the back need to come up front. No, I'm just kidding. So I get the dubious honor of being one of the original speakers for HughesCon way back in the day. It's myself and Jeremiah, who half of you probably just went and saw, as well as Arsenic yesterday. For the nostalgia tour, Michael Farnham, one of the creators of HughesCon, kind of gave me the challenge of what have we done in the past 15 years as kind of the theme for the this year's story or event. And so for myself, as well as several others, we kind of did a take back, looking at where we've come from, where we're going. If anyone has ever seen me speak, one of the other things that you'll find out is I have fun with it, and more importantly, as a penetration tester with over 30 years of doing security research, I held our industry just as accountable for the problems you have, as well as your users and other challenges that we all face out there. So you will hear a little bit of smack talking as we go along with this, but just for context, for myself, yes, the gray hair is real at this point. In my case, I've been doing this before it was called an industry, so pretty much late 80s or early 90s. From there, worked at a small little startup in the 90s. We were one of the first resellers of Checkpoint Firewall 1 in North America. My spouse and I, we actually wrote the training program and traveled the world preaching the gospel of Checkpoint, all the way up to version 4. And then went to a small little company called Internet Security Systems. We were one of the first companies to do penetration testing. It was us and like IO Active, as well as AtStake. In the early 90s. And then this little thing called 9/11 happened, and a lot of you guys have now come into the industry post that. So we got to see really the private sector fall behind to the government sector when it came to security research and acquisition of vulnerability data. And so what we kind of had to deal with as a fallout of that is really getting good at defense. How do we protect the organization? And over time, you've seen these magical things called compliance standards come out. They're now telling you and dictating how you're going to run your organization, what investments you need to. And so we like to take the parallels of really how we got here, what the technologies we have today, and what is working, what's not working. For myself, I'm now one of the co-founders of Direct Defense. So we are a professional security services company. Majority of our work is actually penetration testing, both in your enterprise side, as well as Chris, who actually has a talk here in the next hour, who's going to talk about operational technologies or OT security as well. And then we also have a managed security services. So I can tell you really about both sides of the spectrum, because I also do forensics and I work in the SOC. So really what I was kind of highlighting here is what have we seen and done just in the last 10 years. So just diving right in, for the organization. A decade ago, when you were looking at operational budgets for InfoSec, as well as IT, 90-95% of that investment was made on primarily prevention-only technologies. You call them firewalls, you call them antivirus. You hope it works for you. And the interesting point of that was really our insurance providers also dictated these mandates. It's on the screen, but I always like the quiz. If you were to boil down all the compliance standards out there, or just simply talk to your cyber insurance provider, what are the 4 mandatory technologies everybody has to have to say they have a cybersecurity program? Firewalls, antivirus, log management, patch management. Everything else is hopefully return on investment. But your overall ability to actually get insured is hinging on those 4 mandatory technologies. There's no gray area. When you see when it makes the news that the cyber insurance provider did not cover a specific benefit, is because they were lacking one of those 4 technologies. Now, not to give the answer too far in advance, but there was a new one just added this year. It was actually all over the news about the last 2 months up in Canada. Anyone want to guess what that is? Multi-factor authentication. If you don't have MFA rolled out, they will not insure you. So that is another common business driver for organizations trying to figure out how to get budget, how to get technologies deployed. But our barometer on when did prevention fail is actually very public and very known. The Target breach. Target was a great example of a large retailer over a major US holiday, in this case it was Thanksgiving weekend, that had a breach, identified they had a breach, and chose to continue operating because it was Black Friday. So a lot of business decisions were managed poorly. They continued operating, but they had a bad guy inside the house and they lost a lot of data. What was the biggest outcomes over the next couple of years of all the trials and all the lawsuits? Anyone want to guess? Credit card data has a value. They roughly settled with the credit card industry for about $4 a card. They lost 40 million. User data, like the membership program, the red card program, cost them 110 million. So your user data is far more valuable than your payment data. And that kind of gave PCI a slap in the face and a few others like, hey, this is really what's more important to organizations. We now have laws. You know them pretty much. Here in the US, every state has a privacy law. Internationally, the UK has GDPR, which we all deal with, and now DORA that we're dealing with as well. But we actually started getting some tangible things we could actually hold some level of scrutiny. What am I trying to protect? What's its value? Because that comes back to, from talking geekanese, back to the business side of the house. What am I trying to protect for you here? How do you do business? How do we ship product? Or more importantly, how do we protect the data you harvest? So, one of the challenges we deal with is when you go with prevention only, what happens when it fails? And again, I'm a big psychology guy and a history guy. Go back to World War II, the Maginot Line, what happened? They walked right around it. Same scenario. If you get past your prevention-only solutions, you don't have much visibility. Saw this time and time again with incident response. We now see it obviously more often with ransomware. But bad guy got in, broke into a unpatched web server, got into my email server, something along those lines, did some damage, bounced it around, and they were here for years. I mean, who here remembers the company Nortel? They were a big telephone provider, and as part of their due diligence, when they handed the keys over to their acquirer, oh, the Chinese hackers have been in here for 3 years. We can't get them out. Good luck. So, it's that type of, once they're in, they're in. It's really hard to repel the bad guy out of the environment. The other challenge was really just trying to see where the industry was going. We had some really bad laws. We had some decent laws. We had some decent frameworks being established, and so that was kind of really the, what can I start applying, strategy to, how do I build my security strategy to work with the business side of the house while also keeping my organization as secure as possible. Really, the biggest one was down there at the bottom. Our CISOs were starting to get burned out on a pass-fail program. Did you keep the bad guy out, yes or no? And if you failed, you probably got your walking papers pretty quickly. Hopefully after the event, it's really hard to do recovery while they're walking the bad guy out. He's the only one that knows how to get this thing back online. But that's became the barometer we were all being held to when we got to the executive level in security was, did I keep the bad guy out, yes or no? Not, do I know how to get the business back online? Do I know how to work my disclosures that we now have to deal with in the past decade? All that became a maturation of the industry as we go along there. So we kind of went from this prevent only to really looking at how do we actually deal with recovering the business? We saw this in the early days, especially with the first couple of years of ransomware coming out. Now it's almost adversarial in some cases. If you've gone through one, hope you learned it as a life lesson. I do take a lot of value out of kind of going through each one of those that I've dealt with. But going through a natural disaster, going through something that's directly impacted your life as a really, really bad day, bad week, bad year, what'd you learn from it? What'd you take away from it? When we talk about the cyber side, really that prevent was, how do I get back online? What do I deal with? In the last couple of years, what we've seen is this actual challenge between the insurance companies and your organization. You have a cyber insurance policy. You had a breach. Next thing you know is they airdropped in a large, swath of Booz Allen, Mandiant guys to do all the forensic work for you. But they're not talking to the business. They're not helping the business get back online. They're actually slowing down that process because they want to collect all the forensic and, go put, if you will, fingerprint dust on everything, as opposed to focusing on what's important, getting the company back, getting back into an operational standpoint. And so, that's one of the bigger challenges we've dealt with in the past few years is advocating on behalf of our customer as a breach coordinator. You're starting to see this pop up more and more again to really, work with customers and try to get them back online. Same thing from really, while it's a really good goal to try to stop everything, you have to deal with the reality of you're going to have a bad day sometime, so plan for it, deal with it. And we're actually going to talk about a few examples of this. So what have we seen in the last 5 years? Seen a lot of really cool tech. You guys see most of them out there. We went from antivirus to EDRs, endpoint detection and response platforms. So if the first engine on the endpoint protection platform didn't work, aka the antivirus engine, at least we can collect all the artifacts to hopefully get a second or third chance when they start doing really bad things, like they pivot to persistence or try to go for escalation, and then start exfiltrating and lateral movement inside the environment. It gave you a second, third, fourth, fifth chance because it's basically a flight data recorder of what's going on in that system. We saw some other advances in technology, some better than others. But SIMs got a little bit better. We saw some automation, coming out of those platforms. We saw, some strategic investments. We saw purpose-built platforms being made, like web application firewalls. Because let's face it, a regular packet filtering firewall really doesn't do a good job of protecting your app, especially if the vulnerability is after the login point. So it's really trying to get to better visibility and overall ability to actually restore was the #1 challenge for the organization. But we saw some interesting pivots, especially on the forensic side, especially on post-analysis. Who here has dealt with ransomware or seen some of the news in the last 2 years? What's the main pivot? Before, ransomware was highly disruptive. Main goal was, stop the business, can't work, and you're going to have to negotiate with me to get back online. Now they're doing ransomware as a calling card. That's not the main goal. We're going to talk about that in the next slide, but that's not their primary goal. That just lets you know they were there. The other key area is, we've really started seeing a lot of advances in user awareness training, argumentative, but we saw some advances in user awareness training that started teaching our users what to spot when we talk about phishing attacks and those type of things. The downside is we're now seeing the bad guys using AI, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail here, but they're using AI to basically defeat everything you just taught your employees. So they're gaining cultural awareness, they're getting localization, like a New York accent versus a Southern accent versus a bruh out in California. You can actually get very, very generalized, localized language in both text and human form these days. And then my personal favorite, they started spending real money. Now, that is a tongue-in-cheek. Who here knows what the stat, just ballpark it real quick. How much does the bad guys spend when they get a successful phish? The key word is successful. Any idea how much they invested in that breach? Industry standard is around $3 to $5. That's how much the bad guys spent to break into your organization. Because they're doing it at scale, they're doing millions, so they figured out ways to really get, they're using automation to do this as well. But the main thing we saw in the past couple of years with our friends at Scattered Spider and comms was they were spending real money. They were actually going in and either social engineering at your local T-Mobile store. I happen to live this next city over from the first kid that got arrested. He was a manager at a T-Mobile store there in Palm Coast, Florida. But yeah, essentially they were abusing the states of multi-factor. Most of you have probably rolled out multi-factor authentication. Hopefully you're using the PIN code or the pop-up notification, and you've completely eradicated the use of text messaging, right? Haha. It's societally, we've all been taught that, text messaging is fine, unless it's out of your control because you don't own the carrier. So that's, one of the common things we didn't think about is there are ways of bypassing, just not having to attack your front. I'll come through the side. I'll just go to the T-Mobile store and steal your phone number. And then I'll pretend that, I'll call your help desk. They'll ask me what the notification that comes through Microsoft or whatever your primary authentication platform is. And hey, I got your phone. I'm going to get the text message. And so that's how they were bypassing it. And so order of magnitude, they went from spending $3 to $5 to about $2,500. They had to send somebody in a store and buy a phone, right? And then from there, probably tip off the guy that actually did the porting of the phone number over to them. So they were spending around $2,500. That's major investment on their side. Comparatively, 3 to 5 to now $2,500, that's real money. They're actually spending a lot of money on AI these days, and so we'll talk about that as well. But the other biggest area that we saw, and why I say ransomware as a calling card, is if you think about the modern breach, you're hearing about double, triple, in some cases quadruple extortion as part of the breach event. It's not the fact they broke in and ran ransomware. That was literally the last thing they did. They stole all your data in the first thing. And we as an organization, and we can even have a conversation about societally, have a really bad habit of collecting everything we ever generated and storing it. Sometimes it's online. If you move to G Suite or Office 365, many times it's on some storage server sitting over in the corner, and we affectionately call that the U drive or the Z drive when you automatically map and your user logs in for the day. You wind up with a lot of residue that unfortunately comes with a ton of liability. And that's actually where we're seeing the payouts. Operationally, we're actually seeing that is getting paid out to the bad guys 75 to 80% of the time, whereas ransomware has now fallen to about 25 to 30 because we've gotten pretty good at backing up and restoring. So, kind of keep that in mind of, what is, getting them paid, what is their motive, what's the easiest thing they can do, and what's the best thing you can do. The best thing you could do, quote unquote, if you listen to the marketing out there, is turn on data leak protection, or DLP. Unfortunately, it's got about 20 years of stagnation in it. Anyone ever dealt with a large DLP project from 10 years ago? We all have the scars at some level, both physical or mental. And so the challenge there is data leak protection is this acronym for about 20 to 30 different approaches to the same problem. No one could standardize on what it was, but it actually does kind of sort of work. Not great. So it's like I like to say it keeps the honest people honest. But if you're really trying to protect yourself against someone that's determined to break in, you should probably turn on the support for international languages because it doesn't really work very well against non-English language. So anyone ever tested one of these, especially when you're dealing with CAD designs? Because let's face it, I know quite a lot of people in Russia and China, and they don't speak English on the day-to-day. So literally, you can open up a browser, take a technical document, cut and paste into whatever your favorite translator is, go from English to literally Cyrillic, take your BIC, and then send that document right on out. The first attempt with the English document gets blocked. The second attempt with the non-English language goes right on through. It's because most people don't turn on the everybody else language. It's a default setting in most of those DLP platforms out there. So turn them all on to see what you can actually get. Now, I will be the first one to tell you, you're going to get inundated with a ton of false positives. Foundationally, some vendors have done a good job, and I will actually give credit where credit's due. Microsoft is actually kind of leading the charge. You do get it as part of your E5 subscription. It's not so much the DLP, it's the data categorization. You can now operationalize the concept of every time my employee creates a new document, it has at least some level of data categorization to it. It's public, proprietary, whatever you want to designate that default state. And we can at least operationalize that in the SOC to say, oh, I just saw 10,000 proprietary documents try to leave. It gives me context of what I can see. So it's not a silver bullet, but it is an early warning system that you can actually try to turn into an impactful way to get ahead of the actual threat. There are some vendors trying to solve this problem, and I'll give credit, again, where credit is due. Halcyon, they're specifically an anti-ransomware platform, and they have data leak protection at the endpoint. Very effective, even in red teaming tests. So, I'll give, anybody that does a gold star, in my opinion, gets a shout out. So. The main thing was, again, trying to actually come up with practical advice on what you can do with limitations of technology and how you can roll them out as best you can. Feel free to talk strategy or, sit down with beer. We can always kind of go through war stories of what works and what doesn't. So, what we've seen in the last couple of years is that prevent only with 4 or 5 technologies has changed. We're now talking about detect and monitor. Hopefully we can stop the bad guy, but at least we can see it post-event, and we can get data to give ourselves a 3rd, 4th, 5th chance. We've now got DLP to try to get in front of the thing that's getting the bad guy paid most consistently. And then we've started actually getting pretty good at backup. You've heard the term immutable backup, and for anyone that's old enough to remember Commvault and Backup Exec when they had their encrypted backups, that was a decent half-hearted attempt. But the newer immutable platforms have gotten better. We've also got cross-tool visibility. You've probably heard the term purple teaming, where you either get a simulated attacker or SOC to sit down with your SOC and actually go through purpose-built examples, or some of the new AI pen testing platforms are really kind of forcing that purple team role. Test yourselves. One of the biggest things you can do for yourself is get a tabletop. It doesn't actually have to be a technical exercise. It could be just an intellectual exercise with all the business leaders, and I stress that, all the business leaders, so you can actually get the geeks in the room with the business leaders in the room and eradicate perception versus reality. Out of curiosity, anyone work at a publicly traded company? Couple? Pop quiz of what's the minimal gap on your main accounting platform for the data for Sarbanes-Oxley? When you're reporting, what's the maximum size gap you can have in that data? Answer is 4 hours. So if you have to actually write your quarterly annual reports, you can only have a 4-hour gap inside your data set when you present that and say it was a problem from backup or in store. Does the CFO ever invest in 4-hour backups on major infrastructure like that? The answer is no. So the reality is, at some level, the business has to make a business decision on what's acceptable, what's not, and really how fast or how quickly you can try to restore. Same thing for, testing for social engineering. The biggest thing I really work on is going through actual scenarios that you may actually face. So working with your KnowBe4, whomever you're actually working with on your user awareness training, get something unique to your industry. There's the generic stuff. We all know phishing. We all know voice call and smishing now via text messaging, which is what we deal with a lot in the SOC. But realistically, just kind of sit down and go through what is unique to your industry. How would you be attacked? What are some of the commonalities that we're seeing across the board? Good news is Scattered Spider kind of gave a crash course for a lot of people. So there is some really good training that's coming out, being updated based on the attacks they were using for the past 3 years that do leverage AI. So it gives you a chance to kind of go back and retool and reevaluate the effectiveness of your program. So I do strongly recommend you get a refresher on what's going on out there. My favorite ones on also was like, where else can we go? Avoid silos. I can't tell you how many times as a SOC guy, sitting down there and just watching the teams try to work, and everybody's trying to solve the same problem but not talking to each other. That's a very big challenge that we deal with, especially from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 analysts. Making sure they're collaborating, making sure they're communicating, and avoid those silos. We see this in modern day enterprises, especially around operational technologies, with operational technology and physical security. They don't talk to each other. And so we constantly deal with, I thought you got this. So the finger pointing game, when a cyber event impacts the actual productivity or whatever, you'll see this. And so trying to get everybody in the same room, go through that tabletop so we can, again, eliminate perception to reality. Same thing for our penetration testing. I'm old school. Back in the day, a pen test was, early 90s, beginning of the .com era. A pen test was $25,000, no question asked, no scope asked. You're about to get slapped in the face and see how you deal with it. It was a little bit of cybers. We would try to break in. Usually it was like a capture the flag, like put a file on the server. And honestly, if you were good enough to repel us for about a day or two, we just call up the local admin at the office and physically break into the building and steal the server and walk out the front door with it. So, still won, right? Yeah, I still got the server. So yes, it was very cowboyish, I'll be the first to admit. But at the same time, that's kind of what we've lost is, we can only order a pen test at this time of day. And your attacker doesn't care. So, I understand you got to keep the business running, completely understand. It's just a matter of let's get some realism in our testing and actually make sure that you're eliminating those blind spots as best you can. Tabletops, like I said, are one of my favorite exercises to really just sit down and kind of go through. And I've seen the best change in culture from an organization from the top all the way down just by getting them in the same room for a day and making them think about the world's worst problem for themselves. How do you handle press? How do you handle disclosure in multiple states? How do you handle just feeding the people that are there to rebuild the data center because it's all in a ball of death courtesy of ransomware? These are logistic items that your executives have to be prepared for, and it really builds a community spirit out of the exercise in most cases. And then my favorite one is backups. I always you may have an insurance provider, depending on your policy, they will give you free tabletops. They always glaze over your backups just restored and work perfectly. I like to say backups only work in Candyland. So make sure you actually sit down and break your backups without naming products and things like that. Who here has an all cloud backup solution? Just everything's out in the cloud, so. Have you stress tested it with like 40, if you had 100 machines to restore, have you stress tested it with like 50 at a time? Cool, you're one of the few. So congrats. Did it work like you're expecting it to? Like a glove? Well, you're one of the rare cases. So in most cases, you'll find out you get rate limited. So you think you've got a backup plan, you're telling your executives, I can fully restore all 100 servers in the next 24 hours, and you get rate limited by Microsoft or whomever your cloud provider is. And basically 24 hours just became 96 to a week and a half. And so you're frantically calling Microsoft or whomever your cloud provider is to open the floodgates. I need to restore all 100 boxes in a timely fashion. So it's those little hiccups that you just don't anticipate, and then they're in the middle of an event and you're in, sleep fatigue, everything else. It's just the other thing you've never tested before. My other favorite one from back in the day was, as I mentioned, Commvault Backup Exec had an encrypted backup option. And some people, for whatever reason, Again, pop quiz for everybody. What's the #1 targeted operating system out there for bad guys? Windows. Right. Why would you put anything truly, truly critical to your capability of doing backup and restore on Windows that's probably going to get hit with ransomware? So the old trick was you had a Commvault had a encrypted backup. They had a specific box they charged the line item for, and it was, I'm not going to lie, it was expensive. So everybody turned on the certificate authority server on the domain controllers and just used the CA functionality to do their key management. The downside is when you get a ransomware attack, one of the first things that goes away is the certificate authority server, so you can't actually restore your backups. You actually have to call Commvault and politely ask them to break their EULA and reverse engineer the math that was used for the encryption of your tapes. So yes, there is ways to get them back, but they will charge you a handsome reward for doing it. But yeah, it's just those type of things. Just sit down, logically go through how your backup and restore works. And then my other major one that I give away for free for everybody, print your manuals. The operation manual, the backup restore manual does need to be printed, doesn't physically need to be somewhere in the building. Because if it's on SharePoint, on an on-prem file server, and you get locked up, you can't get to it. I have seen some exemptions. My worst case one I ever dealt with, and Chris and I can play disaster bingo with most of you out there of natural disasters, but mine was train derailment. Train derailed, went through the side of a data center, so the hard drives for everything were out in the front yard, including the manual. And it was under the side of an actual derailed car. So we couldn't get to the manual either electronically or physical because it was just unacceptable at that time, so they had to write it on the fly. So realize that some of the challenges you will be faced during a disaster, that not everything's going to be perfect. Get ready for some problems. And the best part is you actually come away with who's the calmest person in the storm. That's the person you kind of help co-lead or lead the event because they think clearly under duress. And it's one of those things you can, again, plan ahead for and get ahead of. So the AI factor has been the funnest one. Everybody's talking about AI. First of all, I would argue if you only added chat to your AI initiative, you haven't gotten to AI yet. But it's been interesting to see what the vendors are giving out there. When we talk about what the bad guys are doing with AI, I kind of gave you the answer earlier, which was they're using it to enable their attacks, especially with phishing. About fall of 2023, when ChatGPT 3 came out, we saw a significant hockey stick on the SOC side of the industry on the successful amount of phishing campaigns that were landing inside the environment. And in most cases, it's because the bad guys switched to using localization, no spelling mistakes, proper acronyms through press releases from the organization to write their campaigns. And so it looked legit. And so we were looking for new ways to kind of help employees update user awareness training based off of campaign. Is it common for this person to talk to you about Project Viper, which you're not even on? That type of general knowledge and awareness training, just to question, that's impactful for the organization. But again, bad guys are using it for sure. The other thing we've seen, and it just made all the news, was a couple of press releases this week that talked about two of the major ransomware actors are using AI. Specifically, they're using the Bloodhound campaign or the tools to map out from initial access to lateral movement to shortest path to take over the environment. So the good news, bad news is ransomware is now detonating in under 9 hours on average. So you've got 9 hours to get them out. So the time to, they're using AI to get faster. We use AI to try to get better, right? Over on the SOC side of things, the Defender is where we've seen the most successful progress, and I'll stress that word. We're seeing it be used successful to consistently respond to the highly confident alert. So, that's a interesting way of explaining it, which is if I really see this red light flash, and I see the type of alert, and I know there can be no other choice but this is a legitimate attack, it's automating those things consistently time and time again. Biggest one we see obviously is compromised credentials, especially if we're looking for a new MFA attribute being added to an employee. We haven't seen the alert about the bad guy using, let's say, M24 VPN to break in and look like they're physically in the same city as the compromised user. So they're using subterfuge, and we have to get a little bit better on early warning systems and identifying that. The downside that is it's not making real decisions yet. So we can automate the highly confident, we know this is bad response. But what you're seeing across the industry today is you're seeing telemetry and analysis being automated. So it's still positive. You're still getting timely responses on all the artifacts and presenting this to someone, literally a human, to make the final determination that this is something we should go into. Do we think it will get to that next level? The short answer is yes. Right now, it's polling at about 12 to 24 months. Some vendors are very early on their adoption stage, but it's not replacing, if you will, tier 2 SOC analysts today. It is definitely replacing tier 1. So as the participants in the SOC, it's our job to train the tier 1 so they can actually start stepping up to tier 2 faster. Humans still have to be involved in this. And then for us, what we've really kind of seen is that alignment to really getting as best we can on the defense side to what the bad guys are doing. On the other side, to the white hat guys that are doing the pen testing as well, we've seen a lot of advances. Maybe you've seen Horizon 3. Pantera has been using it for a long time, AI models in their platforms. They're doing the highly confident exploits. So if you just want to test your domain controller 27 times a year, that you've properly eliminated all the backward compatibility vulnerabilities with Active Directory, by all means invest. The downside is not making very intelligent decisions post that. I like to call it mission-oriented. It's only focused on one thing. But if the really important thing is over here, it's not making that statistical leap on its own. Someone else is behind the scenes driving it to make that determination. So do we think it will get better on those technologies? Again, the short answer is yeah. Timeline-wise, I would give Pantera the thumbs up. They're getting there faster, but they're still, by their own admission, about 18 months away from that. So again, LLMs are all here to help speed things up. But again, it's on us to actually make sure we train people to actually, when the LLM doesn't work, to make sure we actually know what's going on. So I'm a big believer, if you ever listen to me, security is a people, process, and technology problem, or a solution, I should say. I'm a big investor in the people's and process before technology on my side of the stick. And so, users are still our critical point of failure. We still have, let's say, 6 generations of employees that have grown up with the internet that are poorly trained. We're doing our best. Some have gotten better, but there's still more investment to be made. And the best thing I've ever seen time and time again is human training. That know before stuff does work, but at the same time, having a brown bag lunch or a virtual webinar with people and giving them real stories of what the SOC is seeing, how the organization is being attacked, and paralleling that back to the organization or parroting that back to the organization, is the most impactful way of getting that information out there. Same thing for our training to evolve the simulated AI attacks. There are a couple of themes we've seen out there, specifically using AI against AI. So if you've invested, Microsoft hasn't given it away for free yet, but they've got a AI model for Defender for Exchange. But the other vendors out there, like Abnormal Security and some of the like the proof points of the world, they do have AI in their platform, and they will actually tell you if the email coming through you, it looks like an automated. So that's actually a filter right there. If someone's hitting you with, hate to tease the sales folks, but if you get an outreach from a salesperson and it looks like it was ChatGPT created, organizationally, is that a time waste for you or not? You can kill that or not. So, I mean, you've got that capability now in the platform just to say, this was an automated, generated text. I don't need to, answer that because I only want to talk to humans. So I've seen that being turned on as a filter now. Same thing for our compliance. Compliance is getting better. As I said, they finally added a 5th technology, which is MFA. So compliance and insurance kind of go hand in hand today, and so we're definitely seeing some advances there. The biggest one, as of late, has really been helping organizations try to get their hands on data categorization, so you can actually start seeing your data. The other thing is actually training your executive officers, especially HR. There's no reason to store 15, 20, 30 years of employee records if your company's been around that long anymore. By most state law, you're only required to do it for 4 years. So keeping that stuff on file, keeping it on the Z drive, is just exposing your liability to people that may be, unfortunately passed on at that point, that you're now having to contact their, family estates and so forth to say that you had a breach today, and then, they're due a payout because of your inability to protect that long-term data. All that goes into play of just, how long are you keeping it? Do you operationally need to keep it? That needs to be a bigger conversation at the executive level. So, like I said, our budgets used to be all prevention. We've now seen it actually go more towards the portfolio detection, service providers assisting in part of that staff aug side of the house. We've also gone through data recovery, making sure that we can get there. And most importantly, talk to the executives, make sure your data recovery efforts are within business scope or reason. If they're not, that's a risk acceptance that they have to accept and write their name on. It's part of all the compliance officer process. But at the end of the day, if I can't make a backup, I can't pay for a backup solution that meets your operational requirement, CEO needs to sign that, not me. So that's a risk acceptance process that needs to go up. Frame your budget really based on your request. Number one is protecting the assets. What is the asset? When we talk about manufacturing customers today, it's the product getting into a box and getting into a truck. That's what the CISO is actually being held accountable for, not the cybers. It's actually the product going out and shipping and making sure the company continues making money. So, that operational change also requires a context of change when we talk about our cyber posture and how we're handling the protection of stuff getting in a box and going out the door. Same thing for your credibility. Being able to understand the business will get you further in your career, especially for those that I see a few fresh faces in here. Getting your career and actually understanding, we're all can be very technical and skilled at specific technology or discipline or methodology. Understanding why people do certain things, especially in a business, that's a key driver that actually will accelerate your, honestly, that accelerate your growth in your career because you're actually adding more value from taking that technical back up to the executive management side. And then last but not least is, safeguarding the company reputation. Reputation still do mean something. Good news is, that everybody will tell you now, you will get a reputation consultant if you suffer a breach. It cycles about 30 days. So if your brand can withstand that level of scrutiny for about 30 days, that's pretty much the attention span of the American market today. Some would say less, but that is the attention span for bad press. And so getting ahead of that, spinning that correctly. So what you've seen most recently, anyone remember United Healthcare got breached? Lost all their insurance information? Do you still talk about it every day? Nah. Yeah, that was a good job of spinning really well. Oh, we're doing all the good things, and we're going to go ahead and sign you up for protection, et cetera, et cetera. That was all established during the target breach. So the things you're seeing today came from 10 to 15 years ago on how we're handling that, what the playbooks are. So by all means, go back and kind of study that analysis and see what you can apply that to your organization. So with that, really, key things. Look at the bigger picture. For yourself, making sure you're always focusing on resilience. You'll see this in marketing everywhere now. This year's marketing buzzword is resilience. But realistically is how do you get back to an operational state as fast as possible for the organization? Making sure that you're building your playbooks around that model. And then from there, understanding the attackers are adapting faster than the tools are. So you kind of always need to go and get that refresher update. Things like this are great. As well as just talking to whoever your peers are in your area, if you got a peer group, or talking to some of your vendor partners as well. So with that, I'll kind of wrap it up. Anyone got any questions for me? Tough crowd this morning. Well, thanks, guys. Hope you have a great day.